Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the July 10th City Council meeting. Dusty, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Rogers?
Here.
Ms. Ramsey?
Here.
Mayor Pons?
Here.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Here.
Ms. Kernshire?
Here.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. Council preview, Mr. Trivett?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Let's see. For Thursday, we have the presentation of Excellence in Service Award to Nick Rubino. We have a public hearing concerning a walk-in freezer at Matthew Whaley. We have an important operating report on Thursday from Economic Development concerning the improvements to the Prince George Street outdoor dining. And then under unfinished business, we'll consider the memorandum of agreement between the funding partners of the Williamsburg Regional Library System. And under new business, consider an upgrade to the lighting at the tennis courts at Kiwanis Park. Do some appointments to boards and commissions, and consider the purchase of two pieces of property at Waller Mill to protect the watershed. And then our final item of business will be to consider a budget amendment recognizing some grant funds from VDOT.
Excellent. Good. Thank you. Any questions for the city manager? No? All right. So this is an opportunity. This is a public comment. If anybody would like to come forward, please do so. State your name. Seeing none, we'll close that public comment period and come to background presentations. And first is a presentation to discuss the Colonial Parkway Rehabilitation Phase 1. Mr. Small, are you going to introduce?
I'd like to introduce Mr. Jerry Whitlock from Wagman JMT, the joint venture who's performing the design build at the Colonial Parkway.
Welcome, Mr. Whitlock.
Good afternoon. Thank you. Awesome. Again, good afternoon, council, guests. I'm going to talk to you today about the Colonial Parkway project, give you a update on where we're at, and talk a little bit about the parts that mostly affect Williamsburg. So this is an overview of the project. On the left-hand side of your screen, you'll see the city of Williamsburg with segment G, and then we'll go going left to right. We have segment G, segment F, segments E and D, which I'll talk about those together if we have any questions on them. And then segment A over by Yorktown. Feel free to ask any questions as I go through if you have any. Looking at segment G in particular here, our schedule for segment G is down at the bottom. We anticipate starting later this summer, early August, starting from on the section from 199 to the Williamsburg Tunnel. And we'll continue working on this piece. Segment G runs from 199 to roughly, I always use Parkway Drive as the boundary because that's the interchange. It goes a little bit further to Hubbard Street or Hubbard Lane. But we'll work on that from starting this summer to fall of 2025, specifically October 31st of 2025. And the big things here, that the impact is going to be the detours. And these are detour routes in our public information meeting. I put this out as these are can-use detour routes, right? Anybody who lives locally is probably not going to use these detour routes. They're going to use other routes they like better or whatever works better for them. But these are the signed detour routes that we're going to put in, and they're mainly for the tourists and parkway users, out-of-town folks. But this is for our first phase of segment G, which, like I say, is going to run from August to roughly mid to late spring of next year. And we're going to be working from, the parkway will be closed from 199 to the circle, but we're going to keep the section from the circle to North England Street open to public traffic as long as we can. Mostly buses going, the tour buses going in and out. But it will be completely closed to traffic from the tunnel to 199 while we're doing this work in here. The detours for this piece are going to, let me go to the next slide. It's got a zoomed in version. There we go. The detours are going to, basically, if you're trying to get from Jamestown to Yorktown, you're going to exit the parkway at 199, follow 199, turns into Penniman Road, and you get back on the parkway at Penniman Road. If you're trying to get to all of these detour go from visitor center to visitor center, effectively. So if you're trying to get to the Williamsburg Visitor Center, if you're coming from Jamestown, you'll take 199 to I-64 to 143, turns into 132 and takes you to Visitor Center Drive. If you're coming from Yorktown to get there, you're going to take 199, 64 to 143 to 132 to Visitor Center Drive. And again, this piece is gonna range from, August to early to late, or mid to late spring of next year, having North England Street open to local traffic.
Mr. Whitlock, are you going to describe some of the repairs, or is it coming later, or?
Yes, what I'll do, I didn't have a specific slide for that, so when I get to the information slide, I'll talk about that.
All right, good, thank you.
And then our Phase 2 detour is essentially the same thing for Williamsburg. What it does is adds in segments D and E from Failgate Creek to Penniman Road. No change to the detours around Williamsburg. And then our Phase 3 is going to be from the traffic circle at Williamsburg Visitor Center to Penniman Road. And this is going to run from winter of '24 to spring, or to June of 2026. You know, we're going to make every effort we can to finish a little earlier, but the goal of the project is complete all of the work on the parkway before the 250th anniversary. And this is our project email address and project website. So all of the slides that I had up here, plus some other more detailed information, is available on the website. But to get to your question about the work that's going to be done, for segment G, we're replacing 100% of the concrete pavement. So we're gonna come in, we're gonna demo out the concrete pavement. We're going to mix cement with the existing sub base, and then we're gonna put down new concrete pavement over top of that. We're putting down the exposed aggregate concrete pavement just like is there. You know, for the most part, we're matching what's there. There'll be some very minor changes to better the drainage off the parkway and to, you know, kind of get the parkway back to where it was originally designed. As far as to smooth out some of the curves, vertical curves, smooth out some of the horizontal curves. And, but effectively we're replacing what's there in kind throughout all of segment G. Segment G will also have some stream repairs off the parkway, still within the Park Service property. And that's there to improve the climate resiliency for the parkway, make it better able to handle the larger storms that you know, hurricanes, that kind of thing that happen. And we'll be redoing some of the brickwork on Newport Avenue Bridge, on Parkway Drive, Hubbard Lane, and the tunnel will get all new lighting, and we're going to do some concrete repairs within the tunnel as well. But that's everything that's going on in segment G. Any other questions?
Well, does that complete your presentation?
Yes, yes,
Oh,
sir.
good. Well, thank you. Yeah, definitely needed some repair, so we're glad that the Park Service has kind of stepped up and was able to get this done through some federal funding. And I'm also glad to hear that the surface isn't going to change. I would imagine lots of people would have been upset if you tried to put blacktop on that route. And
Yeah, absolutely. Our public meeting, it was a mixed bag. I'd say about 50-50.
Yeah.
Anyone who bikes wanted it to be blacktop,
Right.
but everybody else wanted to stay the same. But our mandate from the Park Service, and because the parkway's on the National Historic Registers, we have to keep it the way it is.
Sure, sure. Yeah, having ridden my bike on it, it is rough, there's no question. And
Absolutely.
it's probably better that you all are doing it instead of getting the old Conservation Corps out, the old CCCs who built the parkway, right?
Right.
Good. And then just as last point, I'm glad that you all have the 250th anniversary as a target date, because we want to make sure that that is all completed by then. And certainly appreciate providing the website so that anybody in the public can log in and take a look at that. Vice Mayor?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Whitlock. Could you talk about, you've had some community engagement sessions already. Have they been well attended? And then what further communications will you have as we approach the beginning of the work?
So we had our public comment meeting on June 22nd, not our public comment meeting, our public information meeting on June 22nd. And it was actually the most well-attended public information meeting that I've done as a design build contractor in 20-something years. You know, we had, especially it was rainy that day as
Yes.
well. So we were extremely pleased with the handout. We had to, or with the turnout, we had to bring in extra chairs 3 times because folks kept showing up, and it was, we had about 65 people, I believe. It was very well attended, lots of good questions. Almost all of the questions were about the Parkway project. You know, typically at public information meetings, you get a lot of questions about things that don't relate to the project. But we were very pleased that almost all our questions were about the Parkway, and it was a very good meeting. We put out the same slides, just a little more in depth on the other phases and the other pieces of the Parkway, like in Yorktown and that kind of thing. We will update we'll have another public information meeting. We call them Pardon Our Dust meetings, but we'll have another one as we get closer to next spring, maybe early summer when we go to transition in and bring in segment D and E. Whenever we do a change to the overall detours, we'll have another public information meeting. And then I think we've agreed that on a monthly basis, maybe a little less, maybe a little more, depending on how much is changing on as far as the public sees. We'll put an update on the project website.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to say thank you, and you know, although it'll be kind of a long haul here, obviously this is an important preservation, you know, thing to do, and obviously I think communication, right, with the public will be key, like throughout the process, so that everybody understands what's going on. But really appreciate you being here and this information, and having this available to the public is very, very helpful. So thank you.
And just real quick, that jogged my memory on something I forgot to say, is we did put out at the public information meeting that you're not always going to see us doing something on the Parkway because it's a long stretch that's closed, and you can only see it from certain points. So there's going to be a long area in the middle where we're working in the middle, but nobody's going to see anything except trucks coming in and out. So we did make that point to the public that, hey, even if you don't see us out there doing something, if it's closed, we're working.
Like everyone else, thank you. I think we've all felt that the repairs to the Parkway have been a long time coming, and everyone will be extremely pleased when all the work is finished. Just a couple questions as a follow-up. So since the work isn't going to start until August, is that what you said?
Yes, ma'am.
Will you put something out sort of like the week before? Hey, a reminder, Parkway's going to be closed starting such and such a date?
Yes, we'll put out variable message signs on the Parkway, similar to what we did for the public information meeting. That was actually our biggest, what our feedback as far as folks knowing about the public information meeting and coming to it were our signs on the Parkway. So we'll put those out about a week prior to putting in the detour.
And for the detours, it looked like, as you mentioned, most of them were slanted more for tourists and for buses that aren't really familiar with Williamsburg. Will you have any sort of alternate detours for, like if someone's at Kings Mill and they want to, typically you can cut through the Parkway into town, but if they're not real familiar with the route, or if they're visiting the resort at Kings Mill and want to come into CW, the closest route would be to go Henry or Jamestown Road as opposed to all the way back down to wherever. Will there be more than just the detoured signs, or would that be too confusing?
So we didn't want to inundate the city and everywhere, all the surrounding areas with signage and confuse the out-of-town folks. It was our biggest concern. And so that's why we're only signing the detours that I had up on the screen. We're not going to sign the other local options for getting around the detour.
Just thinking that some tourist who might find out later about the other ones, it's like, boy, I really had to drive out of the way to get in town.
Well, we figure, and we did all this in coordination with both the Park Service, Federal Highway, VDOT, and the city. But we figure most folks are out of town are going to be using some sort of GPS, and it's going to route them a way that's still open. Because we're going to work with VDOT and National Park Service to at least like go on Google and show that portion of the parkway is closed.
That was my next question.
It works on all the different GPSs like Waze, Google, that kind of thing.
So it will show on there that it's closed.
We're gonna work with them to show it, and if they don't, I'll go out there with my own Waze and keep marking it closed every day until they update it.
All right, thank you.
Thanks for the presentation, Mr. Whitlock. I agree that the Parkway has been in need of some repairs. I also think that some people treat it sometimes as a single lane road, so I'm disappointed to hear those repairs won't be striping it so that there's a right and a left side of it. The question I had was similar to that GPS. I quickly looked it up. It's like 90% of navigational market shares between Waze, Google, and Apple Maps, right? And I understand you all will have the physical signs of how to reroute. Is there anything through the National Park Service or VDOT that can be done to digitally suggest those routes as well?
VDOT's public outreach folks have the access to edit the map for Waze and Google.
Okay.
And I believe they can do other programs. I just don't know what they are, because that's the two that we mostly talk about. But we're gonna work with them to do those edits up front. But like I say, if they don't happen in enough time, I'll go out there with my own and mark it closed until they do.
Yeah, well, thanks for doing that. That's really encouraging to hear. You know, no matter what the signage says, you never know if the algorithm's going to turn people down residential streets, and
Right.
we have that somewhere. If you're getting one place in the city to another, you may zip by Councilwoman Kern Shearer's house on Newport, which I know their residents are usually not very happy about. So thank you, and thanks to VDOT for doing some of that work ahead of time. The second was just more general. What, if anything, could be something that halts or postpones the project and makes it take longer? We've just seen it in some of our capital construction in the city. There can be some heightened timelines.
So we're fairly confident as far as like material supply and that kind of thing goes. We're set up for the long lead items, our steel girders for the two bridges in Yorktown, our steel for the project. We're fairly confident in those. We're fairly well set up for those already. Our concrete supply, I don't see any issue with that. We haven't had any issue over the last several years with that. It's mostly been with steel items. But again, on our other projects, that's way down now. And we feel like we're set up really well for this one. We've actually already released our structural steel girders for the Route 17 bridge. They're being made now, and they should be all set to be shipped on time. The only other things that could come up is if we're out there doing some excavation, like say, not necessarily for the roadway, because we're only taking up the concrete pavement on the roadway, and we're going to reuse the existing base. So everything we're doing along the road is previously disturbed in the 30s through the 50s. But you know, if we're out doing like one of the big drainage culvert improvements, and an artifact of some sort turns up, that could delay us a little bit. But you know, we're going to work with National Park Service and their archaeological monitors to try to minimize that time frame. But I mean, obviously, we're going to do the right thing if something turns up. And but you know, our plan is to move to another area of the parkway and continue forward working on our concrete pavement, because the concrete pavement is the long pole in the tent. So as long as we're continuously working on concrete pavement somewhere, the overall schedule shouldn't change.
Okay, that's good to know. That's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Whitlock. Appreciate you coming today and sharing this information, and hopefully the public is well informed. And again, the website's a little long to read, but they go to the www.nps or .nps.gov and go from there. Should be able to find it.
If you just go to Colonial Parkway's website, there'll be a link directly to this one from there.
Perfect. Well, thank you, sir. Appreciate
thank
your
you.
time. Yep. Okay, next is a presentation of the Truth and Reconciliation Committee report by the members. Mr. Trivett, you want to introduce this?
I certainly can. As the council knows, the council directed the city manager to form a Truth and Reconciliation Committee a couple years ago, and we began the process of working to identify actions the city council could take to address racial inequality and issues that have happened, of course, since the beginning of our city. And so we put together an excellent working committee, have spent a lot of time interviewing residents and coming up with recommendations, and now have completed their report and are prepared to present their recommendations. I'd like to turn it over to the chair of the committee, Mr. Braxton.
Welcome, Mr. Braxton. It's been 2 years and 2 days since we started the committee, so appreciate you all taking all this time to come to today with something. So.
It's been that long. How do I change this?
Just use the clicker, Mr. Braxton.
Just use this. Okay. Technology astounds me. You don't have to excuse me, that's my wife. Can you
Need to take that, you better.
You can imagine the priority associated with it. Good afternoon.
Good
Mayor
afternoon.
Pons, Vice Mayor Dent, Council Members Rogers, Ramsey, and Kern Shearer. I'd like to thank the City Council for actively seeking to acknowledge and address Williamsburg's painful racial history and creating a Truth and Reconciliation Committee. Also committing to including 2 recommendations from the TRC in this cycle of the goals and initiatives, and providing support from the City Manager's Office and the Council. And last, and for inviting me to serve on the committee along with this group. This report is the beginning. The TRC members have volunteered their time and put in a lot of hours. Every member of the TRC believes that the first step in implementing the Truth and Reconciliation process is truth, telling and acknowledging the truth about how racism continues to cause harm. Every member of the TRC wants these harms addressed and remedied. We all want to see the racial divide in Williamsburg heal. But we also know that there are significant issues the report does not address that need to be addressed. The TRC report is before you. Several of the TRC members will take turns guiding you through it, and they are Helen Casey Rutland, Lawrence Colson, and Laura D. Hill. Santa Clicker.
Welcome, Ms. Hill.
Thank you.
Says that one. Santa Clicker.
Good afternoon, City Council members, city administrators, staff, and friends. My name is Laura Hill, and I lead Coming to the Table Historic Triangle, a program of the Virginia Racial Healing Institute. I am honored to be here today to participate in this presentation of the Truth and Reconciliation Report. 2 years and 2 days ago, I spoke at the July 8th City Council meeting about the necessity of a Truth and Reconciliation Committee. And I pledged to do anything that I could to support Resolution 2105, which directed City Manager Andrew Trivett to establish this committee. The council must have remembered this because weeks later I received a call from Mayor Pons asking me to serve on the committee, and I'm honored to do so. The mission of the TRC is simple, and it's simply stated. Our mission is to uncover and acknowledge the truth about the city of Williamsburg's racial history, to examine how residents of African ancestry were disadvantaged and disenfranchised, and to offer remedies to make amends, to foster racial healing, reconciliation, and equity. And I have the pleasure of working alongside my fellow TRC members. Again, Bobby Braxton is the chair. He's a former city councilman and a member of the descendant community. Adam Kennedy served as vice chair. He's with Colonial Williamsburg Foundation. He's also a member of the descendant community. Catherine Barco Alva is a professor at William and Mary. Helen Casey Rutland, a Methodist minister. Lawrence Golson, president of the York, James City County, Williamsburg NAACP. And Benny Zhang, an attorney with Kaufman and Knowles. There we are, and we're going to talk about how we got here. We approached this report with the understanding that truth can hurt, truth can be complicated, but truth-telling is the necessary soil for healing and reconciliation to take root and to blossom. Our report begins in 1699, the year that the city of Williamsburg became the capital of the Virginia colony. It was a time of transition. The Virginia colony was transitioning from a labor system that relied on English indentured servants to one dependent upon race-based slavery, using forced labor of people of African ancestry and their descendants. Through research and extensive face-to-face interviews with Williamsburg residents and members of the descendant community, we have sought to uncover the legacies of Virginia's colonial slave society and subsequent racist practices that are still adversely impacting the city of Williamsburg and disadvantaging and disenfranchising its citizens of African ancestry. As we listened to our community members, themes began to emerge, and we heard story after story of displacement of African American communities resulting in destruction. Destruction of families and businesses, destruction of opportunities to create and maintain multi-generational wealth, and the destruction of communities. We heard repeatedly about the lack of affordable housing, the underrepresentation of African Americans in leadership positions, and we heard of the pain of barriers to accessing health care and community resources, the pain of being erased from history in the birthplace of America, where their ancestors had lived since 1619. Consequently, the report offers 5 recommendations along with corresponding reparative actions, appropriate local agencies, and desired outcomes. We have taken a restorative justice approach, which calls on the city to do 3 things. 1, to identify and acknowledge the harm and the city's direct or indirect complicity in perpetrating harm. 2, to listen and heed the voices of those harmed and affected and promote their leadership when crafting reparative remedies. And 3, to implement reparative acts to right the wrongs and to help heal the racial divide. Now I'm going to pass the baton to Helen Casey Rutland, who will share recommendation number 1.
Welcome, Helen.
Hi, and good afternoon. It's good to be here with y'all. And I just also want to thank you for the opportunity. Thank you, Drew, for the opportunity to be a part of this process and this committee. Our first recommendation, and I'm not going to read it to you, you have it. Our first recommendation relates to the triangle. And part of this grows out of our experience in the interviews that we had of people talking about the history of the Triangle area as a center of Black life, community, business, residents, all of those things, culture, all of those kinds of things. Living history, that's part of our African American community's history. And for any number of reasons, the Triangle, that center of sort of Black life, disintegrated in a lot of ways. And we can go into those reasons at another time, and we'll pick up on some of those later. But nonetheless, what we had from a lot of people, what we heard from a lot of people, was a lot of pain about the loss of that center as a place where African American life was central. And if you look across the country, of course, all over the country, you'll see this kind of thing happen in African American communities where businesses and residences flourished, and for whatever reasons, and you can trace a lot of them to things that are race-related, for whatever reasons, or lack of power related, those communities frequently took a hit in one way or another, to one extent or another. And so out of that concern for that greater triangle area, recognizing that the city, this is something the city actually has some control over with the library space, the Blayton building space, the triangle itself, and that greater area, and the city has history with that. Some of the projects that are there were government funded. Some of the changes to that community were brought about through government action. And some of the pain in that community, you know, wasn't necessarily intentionally caused by government, but the folks in that community who claim that community didn't have a lot of say in what happened in that community. So our recommendation suggests that we re-envision that whole area as an epicenter for Black business, tourism, residency, not as a segregated place, but a place that tells that story. That's part of truth-telling, that tells that story so that throughout the Triangle area there are ways that people can access that history, not just the colonial era history that our town is so good at telling, but our whole history related to the African American community, especially in that area. So it becomes a truth-telling place. It becomes a place where Black businesses can, again, take root and thrive. Residences, people of different income levels can live and thrive. It becomes a tourist draw. People of all races are interested in Black history these days, in multicultural history. And so it becomes a place that becomes a tourist draw. It helps to broaden the tapestry of services available in our downtown area. So that first recommendation has to do with just re-envisioning the Triangle area as a 21st century epicenter of thriving Black tourism, community culture, and economy. And with the hope that it becomes a place that for our whole community helps to educate, helps to build positive relationships, helps to improve the economic life and the civic life for our whole community. So that's the first recommendation. And I'm going to pass it on to Laura for the second, I think.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Helen. The second recommendation is to speak truth and do the work. At the Truth and Reconciliation Committee, we have often said that the work that lies before us is not going to be done in a sprint. It's going to take a marathon. And we understand that what we did in researching and presenting this report is a first step. There is much more work to do. And therefore, our second recommendation is to establish and provide support for a nonpartisan Truth and Reconciliation Standing Committee or work group that's dedicated to addressing the issues negatively affecting the African American community. We know that this work needs to continue, and we are committed to working with the city to continue and to keep the One Williamsburg vision of a welcoming community where all people who live, work, and visit here have opportunities to thrive. As you can see, we have multiple actions, areas of focus to work collaboratively with local organizations to acknowledge truth and to lament harms and publicize and emphasize the importance of racial justice and healing. Feedback is crucial. Gathering feedback and highlighting the city's efforts to effect racial justice. And our goal is that in 5 years, there would be a report that we could look back on and measure our progress and then make further decisions on where we go from here. And now I will pass the baton to Lawrence Golson.
Good afternoon, Lawrence.
Good afternoon, Mayor. Good afternoon, City Council, City Administration, and guests. I am Lawrence Golson, a part of this amazing TRC, Truth and Reconciliation Committee. I also am the president of the York James City County, Williamsburg, NAACP. What a pleasure to be a part of such a work, such a vision. So I definitely appreciate the opportunity. When I first came on board, I quickly realized that it was more than just being a part of doing the research. It was about establishing and protecting the heart of a community, of a people, and understanding what makes this journey a success journey, not just for the Black community, but for the entire community at large. So exciting time to be a part of it. I'm going to speak on the recommendation number 3. And before I start, I will say that as you can see, we have the recommendations or the report set up by recommendations, actions, agencies, and outcomes. So the recommendation really speaks to what it is that we're looking for. For example, this recommendation is to foster a welcoming community. And then the action steps are to lead to what will make that happen. And the agencies are simply the people, the organizations, the resources that are available to make that a reality. And the outcomes obviously is, did the end line up with the idea of the recommendation? So, and I'm going to read from this because I can't see that too well. So bear with me. All right, so when I start, what I'm going to start with is the easiest way is to, sometimes you have to deal with the inner operations or the heart of the matter. What looks healthy on the outside, sometimes it's not healthy on the inside. For example, I recently, in this the TRC, they have been on my back about this. I recently went to the doctor and realized I was diagnosed with extremely high blood pressure. On the outside, I was doing the work. I looked normal to everybody else. I looked healthy to everyone else. However, when I went to the doctor, and I made a decision to go to my parents' doctor because they have the history of the family. So I drove all the way to Dinwiddie County, where I'm from, and went to my parents' doctor because they both died. My mom passed last year, as you know. So I wanted to get a true workup because sometimes you don't hear the history from them. They don't tell you because of either they don't want you to worry, or they may not necessarily know all of the details. Same thing happens within a community. What looks healthy on the outside sometimes has internal work that needs to happen. So fostering a welcoming community deals with working with the city infrastructure, the employees, the folks that we want to be able to take all of these recommendations and be a representation of one Williamsburg. So what we want to do with this particular recommendation is deal with the heart, the arteries, the inner working, the breathing, the bloodline of what it means to be one Williamsburg. So fostering a welcoming culture within the city workforce and leadership that fully values the knowledge, skills, abilities, and perspectives of the Black community. And what we said with that means to just be intentional. In order to establish or reestablish a culture, you have to be intentional in your actions. Establish and implement a robust search, recruiting, and hiring practice within the city of Williamsburg human resources framework to ensure that the city is actively seeking African American employees. In order to do that, we need to nurture a pipeline or a network of diverse candidates. And a lot of times that's from the inside out. If we have someone who's a part of the infrastructure, they are already an employee, and we can help them to promote up and to become a part of what we want to represent that change. There's nothing more beneficial than seeing yourself represented within the community infrastructure. Reevaluating current interview practices just to make sure that there are no biases, making sure that we're sensitive to what questions, what could be perceived as stereotypical type of conversations. Just making sure we are reevaluating and paying attention to that. Maximize and develop a talent in the recruiting system, internal and external. Like I stated before, hiring practices are stimulated when we have folks growing with the organization, and that is the same within a city structure. I'm going to go on down, facilitate a system to ensure inclusive and belonging onboarding practices. You know, it's one thing to be inclusive. Inclusiveness is the buzzword now. But it's not enough to just be included. You should feel that you belong. And that sometimes can only happen all the time, actually. It can only happen by a relationship. You know, you have a relationship, you establish a structure, and you speak to folks with dignity and respect, and you treat people really like you deserve and want to be treated yourself. And as Helen has stated earlier, some harms are not necessarily intentional, but I always say whether intended or not intended, harm is harm. It has already impacted the infrastructure, the arteries in the bloodline, and we need to go back and make sure that we deal with that, whether it was intended or not. Again, use restorative justice practices to address racial harms that occur within the city workforce and be very honest about it. Be okay with having the difficult conversations. They will always start out uncomfortable until the relationship is established. Once you establish the relationship, and as I've had some difficult conversations with some amazing people here, but that's because we have built a relationship and we've been able to be very honest with one another as we move through this whole process. I think that is the most beneficial gift that we all can give to anything that you read in this TRC report, is the gift of just being honest with each other and with yourself. Provide continual training to all new and existing employees in cultural inclusion and competencies. What you don't want to happen, or we would hope never happens, is all of this amazing stuff is here. We begin a process, but there's no continual training for the staff and employees who have to be the ones to represent this. It has to start from the bottom up. So if we're going to say this is the goal, this is what leads to One Williamsburg, then every fabric, every fiber of the infrastructure of the city, every employee, no matter what their job title is, should be allotted the same opportunity for the same training to be able to be a voice, to feel that they matter no matter what their culture is in this conversation. Because this is not just about Black American history and experience. This is about American history and experience overall. This just happens to be the part that impacted a specific group, in my opinion, the most. And we need to be able to begin to have a serious conversation and continue the conversation. The last part is establishing an accountability apparatus to ensure the city fulfills its commitment to an ongoing, engaging conversation, sharing of information, relationship building, and restorative justice. Because what can sometimes happen is, you know, faces change, and then the conversation gets laxed, and the original intent is sometimes lost in the translation to the next folks who are coming along. If we have a system, an apparatus in place, and we are continuously revisiting that, then there should be no reason, we can add to anything that makes sense, but there should be no reason we cannot stick to what we say we're going to do, not only as a TRC and as a city, but as One Williamsburg overall. And that is my contribution for this particular part. Thank you again for being a part of an amazing organization.
Thank you, Mr. Colson.
And I'm passing the mic back to Ms. Helen.
Okay, recommendation 4 deals with mental health, with cultural health, with community health. And there are a lot of pieces to that, and I don't have to convince you, we don't have to convince you that this is a significant issue. And we recognize that the city of Williamsburg has only limited power related to the Williamsburg-James City County School System. And so there are a number of recommendations in our report that call on the city to encourage the Williamsburg-James City County School System to focus on issues related to mental health and all of that kind of thing. But the idea here is to help build a healthy community for everybody. One of the things that is clear to all of us is that, you know, systemic racism affects everybody. There are some clear ways in which the African American community has been harmed dramatically more than the white community by systemic racism, but it affects us all. And part of what we are asking for in here, and what we are recommending in here, what we're recommending, is that the city, in as many different ways as possible, in communities and in institutions and within its workforce, and in as many ways as possible, support culturally competent awareness, support mental health awareness, so that all our first responders and our teachers, firefighters, police officers, anybody, they are attuned to mental health issues. They're attuned to the way race affects those issues, and they are attuned to their own issues that may be affecting that, and for the city to provide training and support and for that kind of mental health within the whole community. Part of this is partnering with local agencies and organizations and providers that already provide mental health services to provide some community-based things. And part of it is focusing directly on social health issues that directly affect the African American community. So there are a variety of things in there, but the hope is that we create, as the last outcome says, a climate that recognizes, respects, and values all of the Williamsburg residents and supports community, social, and mental health for the benefit of all, because this is something that would benefit all of us. There are a lot of pieces to that, and we can talk about them later if you want, but I'm going to go ahead and move us on to recommendation 5. Name it, claim it, fix it. So, as we did our work and our research, and as you all already know, there are an awful lot of ways in which race-based discrimination and actions have affected the African American community, have affected our Williamsburg community. And some people will say, well, slavery ended over 100 years ago. None of us, we didn't do that. And that's true. There's nobody here who was involved in enslaving anybody, and nobody here who was enslaved. And then they'll say, well, and those Jim Crow laws, that's old history too. And, well, that's true. But in the stories that we heard, and in our history, we heard over and over of African American communities displaced. Not all in the city of Williamsburg, but this is one community in a lot of ways, and they all affect Williamsburg. But when you have people who are displaced to make way for a reservoir, people who are displaced to make way for the Yorktown Naval Weapons Station, people who are displaced to make way for Colonial Williamsburg and paid less for their property than white folks were, people displaced over and over and over, people displaced for urban renewal, people displaced, communities displaced, businesses displaced, livelihoods destroyed. And again, over and over, African Americans paid less than the value of what they had. And you start to see that economic hit year after year, generation after generation, in some families multiple times. And you add to that a school system that for many, many years was underfunded and under-resourced for African American students. And then you add to that the kinds of things that, where you're an African American parent and you're wondering why so many African American kids are disproportionately labeled as disciplinary issues, or as are tracked into parts of educational tracks that are not the highest achieving ones. And then you realize that the African American communities, for many, many years, there were lots of jobs that weren't available to black folks. And even if you had jobs, they frequently were jobs that were paid less than if you were paid white, and you start adding these and so many other things up generation after generation, year after year after year. We're naive if we think that all of that kind of history doesn't have an effect now just because slavery ended 150 years ago. The legacy, the economic legacy is real. And the legacy, the cultural legacy, the other kinds of harms are real. So we're asking in this recommendation, we're making a recommendation here, that the city commission a study to see what those effects really are in a whole lot of different areas, and you got them all listed there. So what are the effects? Both of public and private individuals and groups Policy, practice, conscious, subconscious, committed or omitted, intentional, or the result of uncontested norms and practices. I mean, it may be the city didn't do this. It's true, the city didn't create laws that created segregated communities, but the city didn't object. The city may not have participated in an awful lot of things that happened overtly, but the city didn't necessarily fight them either. And in that sense, the city is the appropriate entity to begin to deal with these things. There are going to be people who say that, you know, the harms were a long time ago and we shouldn't be having to address those now, but we have failed, and by we, I mean the city, I mean the nation, I mean society, I mean everybody. I'm not talking like y'all have failed, I'm not saying that, but you know, we as a society, we as a nation have failed to address these well over and over and over again. And so now's the time. And I just applaud you all for saying, yeah, now's the time, let's see what we can do. Let's establish a Truth and Reconciliation Committee. So you'll see in that last paragraph on the left-hand side that we are recommending that as a way to acknowledge a history of racial harm and wrongdoing and to undertake a sustained process of repair, that the city create a dedicated capital Legacy of Racism Fund to address disparity and the effects of racism on Black, brown, and white residents, recognizing that racism has created significant benefit to some at the expense of others. In some ways, racism has harmed us all. In some ways, the disproportionate harm is obviously to the African American community. But, you know, this is sort of a rubber hits the road kind of recommendation. And we think it's important. Having said that, I'm going to turn this over to next. You, Bobby? No, Laura. Sorry, Laura.
We're saving the best for last, so Bobby will go next. Well, you've heard our 5 recommendations. You've heard the corresponding actions and the agencies, as well as our desired outcomes. Next, we're going to discuss community connections, because we don't expect the city of Williamsburg to do this all by itself. Isn't that a relief? A wise woman once said, when we come together to build a more truthful and welcoming community, we all win. And I am committed, and we are all committed to winning. Winning comes from courageous leadership. Leadership that is not afraid to embrace change. Williamsburg is home to a wealth of groups and coalitions that are reckoning with 400 years of systemic racial injustices and inequities. And we urge the city to engage and collaborate with existing and emerging organizations to work towards healing. Some of these organizations are well established and funded, such as William and Mary's Lemon Project and the NAACP. I don't know if do you agree with that, Lawrence? And then we have some organizations that are less than 5 years old, such as the Let Freedom Ring Foundation, the Juneteenth Community Consortium, the Hunley History Committee, and the Virginia Racial Healing Institute. It's very essential that the city embrace these organizations. Now, what we have here is not an exhaustive list of organizations, but it is a list to get the ball rolling. And we've divided it into various categories. One, the descendant community, leaders and representatives, civic organizations, healthcare, the healthcare sector, community organizations, William and Mary, government and leadership. And again, this is our way of sharing that we're all in this together. This is not something that we can accomplish on an island. It's going to take a community effort. It's going to take us all working together to accomplish, again, the One Williamsburg vision of a community where people who live, work, and visit have the opportunity to thrive. Thank you. Passing the baton to Bobby.
Oh, it worked. Reflections. Looking at the screen, it's divided, as you see. The reflections on the left come from the members of our committee here, and I'm not going to read those, but I would suggest that you ingest this page a little bit closer, and to make you do it, I'm going to read The Journey Continues, because I feel it is very, very important. The Truth and Reconciliation Committee is extraordinarily grateful to the people who allowed us to interview them. These community members courageously shared their stories, revisited often painful experiences, and offered a hopeful vision for how Williamsburg can confront the corrosive legacy of racism, remedy harms, and build a better community for all. They were our educators, and our recommendations flow from their lived experiences. The committee's recommendations are an initial effort to begin healing the racial divide in our community. The pervasiveness of racial harm and the time constraints of the committee resulted in a report that is wide-ranging but not comprehensive. Many extremely important concerns remain to be addressed, including law enforcement, the justice system, food and housing insecurity, and the need for a living wage. This report recommends concrete actions as first steps towards racial healing and justice, and it anticipates sustained investment by the city leaders and residents in confronting the legacy of racism. Now, you gave us a big task, and we started it. We are trusting that you will continue to commit yourselves in Williamsburg to the work of truth and reconciliation. Thank you all. Any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Braxton, and thank you each of the committee members that worked on this committee and certainly those that came up and participated today. It was a big ask. I know, gosh, 3 years ago when I began this conversation and Vice Mayor joined in, having the conversation about beginning this Truth and Reconciliation Committee. I wanted to be, just speaking for myself, wanted the city to be part of a conversation that hadn't happened yet, so that we could begin to tell the truth. It was important for me to lead this council, if I could say that, to establish the committee so that we could get to a point where we could take the next step. As Ms. Hill says, this is not a sprint, this is a marathon. And the race will never be over. We've got to keep running and keep working and keep having conversations and keep being truthful. And I'd like to think that this city, led by councils like the one before you, staff that are here working every day to make the city a safe and better place, are committed to making sure that people are treated equally and fairly every day of their life, regardless of their color, age, you name it. That's who we are. That's the one Williamsburg that I think we all want to be a part of. So that said, we are committed to continuing the conversation, and as you pointed out, in our biennial goals and initiatives and outcome, we've agreed as a body to take on at least 2 of these recommendations, and we look forward to kind of having that conversation as a council moving forward so that we can continue that. And I appreciate appreciate everything that I heard today, but just one point, looking at that Ms. Hill pointed out, there are lots of organizations that are having these conversations, and that's good, because it's going to take all of us across the country, across every spectrum of our communities, to have this conversation. And so the city will continue to be a part of those conversations as well. Thank you all for all the hard work that you've done. Very proud of you. Mr. Vice Mayor?
Thank you, Mayor. And I don't have any questions, Mr. Braxton. Obviously, I was council's liaison to the Truth and Reconciliation Committee, and just want to applaud you for all of the work. As has already been stated, it was a huge task put before you, and I watched each and every one of you work. And when you talk about, we put together a group of diverse people with diverse backgrounds, it took a while for the committee to come together and be comfortable sharing their stories and opening up to each other to make this work possible and to provide this report. As many of the reports that we've seen with other work groups, there's a lot of information in here, but as the mayor stated, this council is already committed to making change through establishing this Truth and Reconciliation Committee. Another big part of not only the committee doing their work, but also want to acknowledge the people in the community that came forward and shared their stories, excuse me, and their painful experiences, so that you could come up with these recommendations and they could feel a part of the recommendations. And I know, as Ms. Hill stated, from when this Truth and Reconciliation Committee started, we talked then that this is just the report, and there was a lot of work that went into this report, but there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and that's really going to be the difficult work. So I really look forward to council absorbing all of this information and the recommendations and identifying the two or more that we can get done in this next goals and initiative cycle. So again, thank you for all of the work. Thank you for taking the time to make the presentation today. And I personally know what effort went into it each and every day to put this report together. So thank you.
Yes, thank you all so much. 2 years ago, I wasn't on city council, so I feel very, very privileged, honored to be here today, hearing the report and reading through it earlier. And so two things really kept coming back to my mind during the presentation. The first is that whenever I would speak to somebody on the committee, just in town and about, what always came through was your true joy and dedication and passion for the committee, for each other. It really came through whenever I spoke to you all, how much you truly enjoyed each other and working with each other and growing with each other, and how clearly dedicated you were to this report and to the TRC. And we all owe you such a debt of gratitude for how much you have done to put this together. And then the second thing that kept coming to my mind, and I don't know who said this, I read it somewhere, and I literally don't know who, so sorry whoever said this, and I'm not giving you credit, but it's the quote that progress moves at the speed of trust. And I was thinking about how, you can't have trust without the truth. And so, this work of, having those honest and painful conversations that then generate, that shine light on the truth, that then help grow trust, because you can't have progress without that trust. And I think that this is where, as the rubber does really hit the road about how do you address that legacy of harm that is distrust. And so I am so appreciative of your work to help continue that conversation. And now it just gets harder, and it is a marathon, and it's not easy. But, as Mr. Golson, mentioned earlier, you have to have those honest and painful conversations to build those relationships, to build that trust, to make that progress. And so I'm really looking forward to working with council, with the city, with the committee, members, and with everyone in the community to move forward and really, kind of make progress here in Williamsburg in a way that I know that we can. So thank you so much.
I would also like to thank all of the committee members. There's not a whole lot more I can add other than what my colleagues have said, but really appreciate your time, dedication, and service. And I also want to applaud you for the way that you made the presentation to us this afternoon. When we looked at the PDF, it's like, okay, so how do you condense all of that? And I like the fact that you divided it up and that you interspersed your own personal feelings along with the written word. To me, that was very compelling, and just want to say that I appreciate the way that it came before us today. It gave us a lot more to think about than just reading it, especially as we go forward over the next 6 months, year, and onward. So thank you.
I'll echo that. Thank you all so much for your work. I know it's been hours, weeks, and really years of you all initially getting to meet each other and then trust each other and then perform oral history interviews and then do that background research on what should be our prescription to Williamsburg on how we can try to address our racial reconciliation. I've been so excited for this report. Gee, I've probably bothered you and Vice Mayor Dent, you too many times saying, what's on it? Can you give me a feel for it? I'm really excited to see it. And that is something that I've felt for the last 2 years. Getting to see it when the agenda was posted on Thursday, I felt like I was sitting down to a movie with popcorn and getting to read through it. And it's kind of because, Helen, some of the themes that you had brought up, which I have just in the last 2 years on council, 3 years on council now, started to grapple with more as someone on this council in a position of authority. You'd mentioned, which is true, that no one in this room had anything to do with the transatlantic slave trade, and that is true, but you also say that there are echoes still today of how racism played a part then, and it still does now. I wanted to give an example that you brought up, the Jim Crow laws, and one of the first things, in fact, I think it was my third or fourth vote on this council that we did was take down the monument that was in Bicentennial Park to the Sons of the Confederacy from Williamsburg. That was established in Williamsburg and sat in front of our courthouse for a while and City Municipal Center for a while, right in the early 20th century when those Jim Crow laws were taking effect, right? And you still see those larger trends too. Some still in effect today that aren't around because of policies we still have today, but their impact is the effects of redlining in communities. There's a good book called Color of Law by Richard Rothstein that profiles that. The lack of investment in healthcare. I read a piece the other day about Bon Secours underinvesting in a majority black community outside of Richmond recently. And then as one of our local groups, the Village Initiative profiles every year is what does equity look like in our school district? And is there a disparity between students who, from a grade standpoint, from a detention standpoint, aren't maybe getting the emphasis they need? So I bring that up because I want to root this interest of ours in performing some of this work in real life examples. And I'm so excited that you all got to provide that report today. I'm also very excited because I feel like there is a great confluence in what we've seen outside of the TRC's work, but which are similarly themed. So we got to announce excitingly, thanks to a lot of staff time, that one of the initiatives we had input, if I remember correctly, in the 2020 GIOs of establishing a heritage trail in Williamsburg, received $300,000 of federal funding back in February, and the federal government should release those dollars by the end of the year, and I see that having a good amount of tie-in to this group, including with the establishment of a trailhead. Lastly, I'll say that it was the fifth recommendation that I'm most intrigued by. All five have a significant amount of merit, but we had talked about, and you'd mentioned in your presentation, there were economic opportunities taken from the black community in Williamsburg's past. There were housing and family structures which were waylaid because of some of the actions of Williamsburg or peer institutions here. A lot of other cities which have looked at some of this reparative work are looking at how you invest in home ownership, educational opportunities, business opportunities in a city. And so I'm excited to do a little bit more of that research and see how we can grow from this report. But ultimately, I thank you all so much. I hope I've talked a bit on the importance and why we initially wanted to look at this. Now the onus will be on us. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think the unspoken thing, but it kind of mentioned, we are just the city. And there are lots of communities around us, and part of what we aspire to do is be a leader amongst others. And so if we can share our process or be a part of conversations in other communities, we want to be able to do that so that the conversation continues to grow everywhere. So, Mr. Braxton, thank you so much for all your time. I know it was a lot of work, and I had to twist your arm pretty hard to get you to chair it, this committee, and you agreed, and I think we're better for having you serve. So thank you very much, and thank you again, all of you that did serve. It took many, many hours.
I feel better now, thank you.
You better call Hazel back. Okay, takes us now to City Council communications. Are there any members have anything they'd like to share? Okay, seeing none, we go to open forum, which is an opportunity for the public to speak. If anybody has any comments, please come forward. Seeing none, we will close that open forum, and I believe we have a closed session, Mr. Vice Mayor?
We do. I move to go into closed session pursuant to Section 2.2-3711 of the Code of Virginia for the purpose of discussing one personnel matter per subparagraph 1 concerning appointments to boards and commissions, and one legal matter per subparagraph 8 for the purpose of consultation on specific legal matters requiring the provision of legal advice by counsel concerning personnel.
Second?
Ms. McKay, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Aye.
Ms. Kernscher?
Aye.
Okay, we will go into closed session and return shortly. open session. Vice Mayor?
I move to approve the certification of a closed session pursuant to Section 2.2-3712 of the Code of Virginia.
Second?
Ms. McKay?
Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Aye.
Ms. Kern Shear?
Aye.
Okay, is there any other business other than adjournment?
I move that we adjourn.
Second.
Ms. McKay?
Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Aye.
Ms. Kern Shear?
Aye.
We're adjourned. Thank you.